A new report released today raises questions that could shape the future of the telecommunications industry in the United States. Two companies from China that produce some of the top telecom equipment in the world, they're trying to expand their business to America, and they offered to be investigated. Well, the results of those investigations basically say the companies are not to be trusted and should not be welcomed here. It was laid out in the investigative report on the U.S. national security issues posed by Chinese telecommunications companies Huawei and ZTE. That was put together by the Intelligence Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. At the center of the findings, a potential security threat posed by the Chinese telecommunications companies with potential ties to the Chinese government or military, in particular to the extent these companies are influenced by the state or provide Chinese intelligence services access to telecommunication networks. The opportunity exists for further economic and foreign espionage by a foreign nation state already known to be a major perpetrator of cyber espionage. We want to break down the findings in the report and also try to read between the lines a little bit with Tim Carr, Senior Director of Strategy with Free Press. Hey there, Tim. Talk first about this report, just the nuts and bolts. What's the most compelling evidence laid out in this report that Huawei and ZTE would threaten national security?
Well, I think that the House Intelligence Committee looked at the history of Huawei in particular. The founder comes out of the People's Liberation Army. There have been, as we mentioned before on your show, there have been increased concerns about cybersecurity threats, not only coming from Iran, but from China. There have been incidents of hacking into both U.S. government and U.S. Business interests by Chinese interests, we believe. And so Huawei is very aggressively trying to grow their business into the U.S. And to sell equipment here. And this has apparently raised some I think, legitimate concerns about whether or not they're being very honest about this. They're not very transparent as a company. They're not publicly listed on markets in a way that would allow us to investigate some of their findings, and so we're these concerns are real. I haven't looked at the full report yet, but it sounds legitimate.
Huawei, the target of a story that aired on 60 Minutes last night. And I want to play just a couple snippets from it, and then we can talk about it.
In the telecommunications world, once you get the camel's nose in the tent, you can go anywhere.
Their overriding concern is this, that the Chinese government could exploit Huawei's presence on U.S. networks to intercept high-level communications, gather intelligence, wage cyber war, and shut down or disrupt critical services in times of national emergency.
Huawei is a business in the business of doing business. $32.4 billion in revenues last year across 150 different markets. 70% of our business outside of China. Huawei is not going to jeopardize its commercial success for any government, period.
Now, that spokesperson for Huawei in the 60 Minutes story last night said that the media has been less than friendly to the company. Certainly, based on the fact that it's from China, there's going to be questions raised, but I don't know the extent to which there is hard evidence that it would, in fact, spy on the American people.
I don't know that there is any hard evidence of that in the report. There are concerns about a lack of transparency and the military history of this company. I think that there is a potential for this to have a blowback effect on the United States. You look at American companies like Cisco Systems, which is very invested in growing its business in China. Usually what happens when you have these kind of international controversies, if the U.S. acts against a Chinese company, you could very well see the Chinese government act against a U.S. company on its own turf.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, Tim, in that 60 Minutes report, it was reported that Huawei did get a contract to rebuild Sprint's new 4G wireless network, and that is until the government stepped in and basically asked Sprint not to go through with the deal. Something not mentioned, though, is the relationship between companies like Verizon, like Sprint, with the U.S. government. I mean, do you think that this is one of the concerns, that Huawei would be more difficult to convince to play by certain rules?
Well, it's a good point. The concern was that Huawei is too closely linked to the Chinese government, but here we have U.S. telecommunications companies like AT&T and Verizon that were working with the U.S. government, the National Security Administration, a while back to wiretap overseas phone calls without legal warrant at the time. So I think whenever you have government and corporate interests colluding like this, it's not only a concern for national security, but it's also a concern for users, consumers. So that our privacy has often been hacked into, phone calls have been tapped. So we need to watch all sorts of telecommunications companies, especially ones that get too close to any government.
Yeah, it's almost one of those things where you don't want to adopt a misbehaving child, one that won't follow the rules and do what all the other kids kind of do in terms of what's expected. Last week, Tim, I attended a cybersecurity summit at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in D.C., and the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Rogers, who was in that 60 Minutes piece last night, he spoke. So let me just play a little bit of what he said.
We don't have a lot of time, and what people don't realize is that we are in a war today in cyberspace. It's happening every single day. And this is the biggest national security threat I can think of that we are not prepared to handle in this country today.
So Chairman Rogers, of course, the author of CISPA, a bill that has not become law, but as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, this is a common theme. China, Russia, Iran, they are out to get us. It's time to build up the arsenal and protect ourselves. So talk a little bit about, you mentioned this before, cybersecurity as it relates to some of these foreign companies wanting to expand their businesses here.
Well, politics definitely comes into play here. You've seen in both the Romney and Obama campaign an effort to get tough against China. This could very well be an outgrowth of that. But also of concern is the idea of the marketplace for cybersecurity. With their estimates that I've seen that put this in a multi-billion-dollar business. So it's in the interest of a lot of these companies that provide cybersecurity services to inflate the fear, to play up this idea that we are under threat of cyber warfare. Representative Rogers is very good at kind of fanning those flames, because it helps businesses that sell cybersecurity systems, that sell systems that will allow us to protect against these alleged attacks. It helps them make money. So we need to make sure that the threat is real, because the downside is if we really heighten our cybersecurity system here, it could infringe upon the basic right to communicate, the basic civil rights of internet users. So we need to put it all out on the table and make sure that the threat is real, and that this isn't just a lot of political and economic posturing by special interests. Yeah,
Huawei already in Latin America, in Africa, in some parts of Europe. I'm just wondering, Tim, if you think there's going to be a point where people in the U.S. say, hey, if it's better and faster and more efficient, why can't we have it too?
Well, it's interesting to note that most computer equipment, most telecommunications equipment is in fact made in China. It may have a name like Cisco on it, just that because Huawei is a Chinese company making a lot of the same equipment, it raises these sorts of concerns. But increasingly, China is a player in the technology space, and their ability to create cheap manufactured products should pose a threat to business interests overseas, business threat, not so much a national security threat. So that does come into play in this issue.
Yeah, so interesting. It was noted on 60 Minutes last night. This used to be a field dominated by companies here in the U.S., and now it's almost all foreign companies that have sort of taken over. A very interesting topic. Should be interesting to see what comes out of this report. Tim Carr, Senior Director of Strategy with Free Press, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.